I'm not here to argue, Greg said, sliding the document across the glass table like it was a bar tab. Just sign and go quietly. We're being generous, all things considered. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, just stared at the man who used to ask her to proofread his press releases when he still wore JCPenney ties and didn't know the difference between burn rate and churn rate. We were in the executive boardroom. Friday morning. Sky looked like printer paper outside. Greg's Rolex caught the light like it was trying to distract from the smell of blood in the air. She was in her usual uniform, tan slacks, orthopedic flats, a faded navy cardigan with a snag on the elbow. Not exactly armor, but I'd seen her walk into acquisition meetings with billion-dollar firms wearing that same cardigan like it was Kevlar. I know this is sudden, he continued, tapping the signature line, but you've been around a long time. Long enough to know how these things work. Sometimes evolution requires shedding old skin. She picked up the pen. And for a second I thought, hell, we all did. She'd just sign it. 20 years boiled down to a single page. Voluntary separation agreement. Buried in legalese, the clause. The release. The silence. Greg smiled like a man who thought he won. That smile vanished the moment she put the pen down without writing a thing. No? He said, eyebrows lifting like he was surprised his chess piece didn't move. She stood, adjusted her cardigan, and looked at him for the first time in the entire meeting. Not angry, not sad, just still, like a person memorizing a crime scene. I built the infrastructure that makes your job unnecessary, she said flatly. I know where you buried the bodies. I documented where you bought the shovels. Greg let out a weak chuckle. You're bluffing. She looked at him for a beat longer, then calmly turned to walk out. You'll regret this, he called after her, louder now, something panicked at the edges. You walk out without signing, your 50,000 shares are worthless. You hear me? Toilet paper. She paused in the doorway just long enough for the silence to feel like a slap. I should have said something. I was in the room. I was a friend once. But I just sat there like a goddamn statue while Greg tried to act like he hadn't just poked a sleeping lion with a severance envelope. Then came the line that still rings in my ears. The CFO, Todd, usually a man who avoided conflict like it carried rabies, cleared his throat and muttered under his breath. You just made her the most dangerous shareholder in the company. Greg turned to him, eyes narrowing. What did you say? Todd didn't repeat it. He just leaned back in his chair, already pale, as if he realized something Greg hadn't yet. She didn't lose anything in that room. She just got unchained. Outside, the hallway had gone dead quiet. HR stood awkwardly by the glass doors, holding a box labeled with her name in black Sharpie. But she wasn't crying. She wasn't ranting. She didn't even take the box. Just grabbed one thing off her desk, the 2009 shareholder bylaws binder, and walked out like a woman on her way to a funeral she'd already written the eulogy for. No one applauded. No one stopped her. Some interns stared, wide-eyed. A few executives had the decency to look away. I just watched her until she disappeared around the elevator corner, and the metallic ding of the doors closing felt like a gunshot in my chest. Greg poured himself a drink at 10:07 a.m. I started making backup copies of every email thread I'd ever had with her by 10:09. It didn't take long. Word moved faster than Slack channels or morning coffee refills ever could. By the time I got back to my desk, the whispers had already grown roots. She's gone. Fired. No way after 20 years? I heard Greg said she was obsolete. Obsolete? Someone muttered. She trained Greg. I didn't say a word. Just stared at the glowing screen in front of me while Outlook pinged like nothing seismic had just happened 2 floors up. There were emails about a product roadmap review and a birthday cake in the break room for someone in UX. Like any of it mattered. Like the heartbeat of this place hadn't just flatlined quietly in orthopedic shoes. The interns were wide-eyed. The sales guys were giddy in that insecure, high school jock way. Like watching a teacher they feared finally get canned. One even said, "Guess the dinosaur finally got meteored." I nearly stood up and slammed his head into the fucking copier. But I didn't, because she wouldn't have. That was never her style. She didn't slam doors. She documented them and kept the timestamps. 20 years. 20 years of keeping this company from folding under Greg's arrogance. She wrote the first pitch deck when it was still called Task Splice. I remember watching her walk a room of venture capitalists through a 3-year burn analysis on a whiteboard that didn't even erase properly, while Greg stood in the corner talking about disruption, like he'd invented the word. She trained half the current executive team. Not on paper, nobody gave her official titles. But they'd bring her problems and she'd find answers. They'd panic and she'd print out 3 contingency plans stapled with Post-its. Never took credit. Always took notes. A legal pad in one hand, decaf in the other. Now, her name wasn't on the wall of founders. Never had been. But her fingerprints were on every line of code, every client pitch, every policy that kept this place from becoming just another tech bro echo chamber. I waited an hour before going down to her office. Her desk was already cleared. No drama. No box of sobbing memories. Just neat. Minimal. Like she'd been planning this walkout not for a day, but a decade. The only thing left on the desk was a mug. White ceramic chipped at the rim. Said, "I'm not bossy. I just have better ideas." She once told me her niece gave it to her. It was the only thing I ever saw her bring from home. She didn't take it. But the bookshelf? Empty. Gone. And I knew exactly what had been there. The 2009 shareholder bylaws binder. I remember the damn thing. She used to call it the insurance policy no one reads. She helped write it when the company still had a folding table as a conference desk. I once joked it looked like a courtroom Bible with a drinking problem, dog-eared, tabbed, with highlighter streaks that glowed like hazard tape. Now it was gone. And for the first time, I realized something that chilled me more than Greg's smug smirk ever could. She hadn't been blindsided. She'd been waiting. HR didn't send out a goodbye email. No announcement. No cake in the break room with her name in frosting. Just silence. Like the company didn't want to admit she ever existed. Like removing her badge and wiping her login credentials would erase her from the wiring. But systems remember who wrote them. And so do I. By 3 p.m., nobody said her name out loud. Not Greg. Not the board. Not even Todd, who looked like he'd seen a ghost and hadn't stopped staring at his phone since the meeting ended. But I said it. I whispered it to myself while staring at that empty desk with the untouched mug. She didn't need applause. She had leverage. Monday morning, 8:06 a.m., the office smelled like burnt espresso and fear. Nobody said it, but you could feel it. Something was off. The air had that strange static you get before a lightning strike. IT was camped out in the server room, door half shut, lights flickering like a damn haunted house. Their director, Chet, a guy who used to spend most mornings watching crypto TikToks, was suddenly sober and pacing. Then someone in compliance whispered the first real sentence I'd heard all morning. "Why is someone logging in with her admin credentials?" Everyone went quiet. Technically, she hadn't had admin access in years. They'd phased her out of that level of clearance around 2017 after she caught Greg modifying the cap table mid-quarter and asked one too many questions. But there it was, an authorized login, timestamped Sunday at 2:14 a.m., from a verified IP. Clean. Legal. Logged through a secure VPN she helped implement back in the days when ransomware was still a buzzword. "Could be a glitch," someone said. "It's not," Chet muttered, staring at the log like it was a Ouija board spelling doom. Meanwhile, legal was having its own panic attack. One of the junior counsels, Mira, was standing in the hallway, whispering on her headset while flipping through a binder like it owed her money. I caught the phrase shareholder number 003 and froze. That was her ID. Third person on the original shareholder ledger, right after Greg and the founding engineer who cashed out in 2010 and moved to Costa Rica. The request was simple: disclosure of merger-related documents under Section 6.3 of the 2009 shareholder rights provision. Most people wouldn't have known that clause existed. Hell, I didn't until I started Googling it under my desk like a student cheating on a final. But she knew, because she wrote it. Tuesday morning, the whispers got louder. Someone from finance said they'd gotten a call from a special agent at the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. No subpoenas yet, just questions. Innocent inquiries. About shell accounts. Executive stock buybacks. Cayman Islands subsidiaries Greg used to joke about over bourbon. The call was anonymous, but the voice on the other end clearly knew which files to ask for. By lunch, Greg was snapping at assistants and calling emergency leadership huddles with the blinds down. And then I got the text. No name, just a number I hadn't seen since she left. One line, "Don't sign anything." That was it. No hello, no explanation, no emojis. Just those 3 words, like a flare fired into a sky full of smoke. I stared at the screen for a full minute, heart thudding in my ears like a war drum. I wasn't even sure what anything meant. NDA? Severance? Greg had been dangling a loyalty bonus package around like candy to a nervous trick-or-treat crowd. But I knew better, because I knew her. She wasn't dramatic. She didn't do vendettas. But she remembered everything. And more importantly, she built half the internal systems that Greg was now using to protect himself. Which meant she knew where the cracks were. The back doors. The ghost logins. The audit trail nobody else noticed because she was the audit trail. And now she was somewhere out there, walking quietly through the corridors of this place like a ghost in the goddamn machine. We used to joke that if she ever left, the company would fall apart in 6 months. It had been 4 days. And already the walls were whispering her name again. By Thursday, Greg was all smiles again. Like a snake shedding skin and pretending it was reborn instead of just dangerous in a different color. He threw a champagne celebration in the atrium. String lights, hors d'oeuvres nobody could pronounce, and a jazz quartet playing as if they weren't being paid to drown out the unease. The big announcement? A merger. Global tech group. Some bloated, buzzword-laced software blob based out of Luxembourg, known more for their revolving door CFOs than their actual product. Greg strutted onto the makeshift stage, champagne flute in hand, face so smug you could have slapped a logo on it and sold it as cologne for sociopaths. "Today marks a new era," he said, raising his glass. "Synergy, growth, global scale. This merger isn't just a win for our board. It's a win for every stakeholder in this room." Polite applause followed, the kind that's 40% fear and 60% networking calculus. The room buzzed with smiles and side eyes, execs clinking glasses while quietly texting assistants to triple-check their severance clauses. I spotted Todd, the CFO, across the room, pale as ever, half drowning in a tumbler of scotch that was not his first. He was nodding at Greg's speech like someone trying to pretend they didn't just hear the ice crack under their feet. He didn't look triumphant. He looked like a man who knew someone was watching and was counting down how many lies were left before the dam broke. Then, like clockwork, the ping. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Not a message. A notification from a newsletter I subscribed to. Finance Substack, small readership, mostly deep dive sleuthing by journalists too stubborn to be bought. Title: Leak in the Tropics. Cayman flow-through funds and the mystery of merged misconduct. My stomach dropped. The article was surgical. No names, but implications so specific you could smell Greg's cologne between the lines. It referenced shell company overlaps, suspicious expense accounts, and a recently dismissed female executive from a mid-cap tech firm with historical ties to the audit protocols in question. The timestamps matched. The document names matched. Hell, even the clause references matched. But the real grenade came at the bottom: 3 emails, redacted but traceable, between Global Tech Board members and our own. One line stood out: "The merger vote must be delayed. Legacy shareholder interference is triggering procedural review per Clause 17.3. Advise counsel." Clause 17.3. I hadn't heard those numbers since I walked past her office the week before she was fired and saw her muttering to herself while flipping through the 2009 bylaws with 3 different colored highlighters. That clause wasn't corporate lore. It was hers. A procedural grenade buried so deep in the shareholder policy that only the person who drafted it could remember where the pin was. And she had pulled it. Later that night, I found myself digging. Rabbit holes. Linked in breadcrumbs. Old calendars. And there it was, 3 weeks before her firing. She'd had a lunch meeting offsite. The name? Eric Landau. I recognized it instantly. Forensic accountant. former federal fraud investigator turned independent consultant, known for tracing money through shell core like a bloodhound with spreadsheets. She met with him before they fired her. She knew. And now the walls were starting to buckle. Greg didn't read the Substack that night. He was too busy posting a selfie from the atrium, captioned "Big moves, big future," with his flute of champagne raised high and his eyes glassy with arrogance. But Todd saw it, and so did I, and I swear, the second I finished reading that article, my hands were shaking. Not with fear, with awe. She wasn't reacting to being fired. She had orchestrated her removal like the opening scene of a heist film. And now, with every smile Greg forced and every nervous sip Todd took, I realized she wasn't gone. She was detonating the company from the foundation up. And Greg just invited the press to watch BY Monday morning. The atrium still reeked of stale champagne and denial. Greg was nowhere to be seen. The glass-walled C-suite was shut tighter than a sealed deposition. But the real action wasn't in the boardroom anymore. It was in the cracks. Specifically, the cracks she had mapped out years ago with surgical precision. At 9:43 a.m., someone forwarded me a post from a private shareholder forum I didn't even know existed. Old-school design, password-protected, mostly middle-tier investors, pension fund vultures, a few ex-employees turned Reddit sleuths. Thread title: Clause 17.3, Time Bomb or Legend? Inside, screenshots, snippets of bylaws, anonymous breakdowns of what Clause 17.3 actually allowed. Procedural stalls, vote reversals, temporary freezes on executive compensation in case of governance conflicts. The kind of clause legal dismissed as harmless legacy language. The kind of clause Greg had forgotten to scrub when he rewrote the charter in 2018. The kind of clause she had slipped in when nobody was watching. And then came the name Greggate. Started as a joke. A few memes. Someone photoshopped Greg's head onto Nixon's body. But the term stuck. It grew legs. And suddenly what had been whispers in finance offices became a digital autopsy of his leadership. Then, at 10:21 a.m., a former HR director dropped a bombshell in a whistleblower forum. Her name was Alina Grant. She worked here from 2012 to 2019. Respected, quiet, always kept her hair tied back and her secrets locked tighter than Greg's bonus structure. She never said a word when she left. No LinkedIn post. No farewell lunch. Her statement hit like a wrecking ball. Between Q3 2016 and Q2 2018, I was instructed, by verbal direction only, to target specific senior employees for termination or demotion ahead of quarterly stock buybacks. These employees held substantial unvested shares that, once reclaimed, would improve earnings optics and reduce dilution ahead of private placements. She named Greg. She named the compensation committee. She even attached a timestamped screenshot of a Slack message Greg sent her in 2017. We need to trim fat before the buy. Start with people who won't sue. You know who. Fat. That's what we were to him. Disposable assets with dental insurance. By noon, #Greggate was trending in small-cap investment circles. Reddit threads were dissecting stock movement patterns like a crime scene. Discord servers were sharing internal memos. Ex-employees were crawling out of the woodwork like survivors from a forgotten war, all with receipts. Greg called an emergency all-hands at 1:15 p.m. sharp. His camera was on. His tie was off. His voice, a mix of fake calm and boiling rage. I want to address some unfounded allegations made by a disgruntled former employee and certain malicious actors attempting to destabilize our company during a critical transition. This is a coordinated smear campaign. Nothing more. He looked straight into the lens and added, We believe a recently terminated individual may be involved. Rest assured, our legal team is handling it. No name, but everyone knew. He was talking about her. And then, like the sound of a trapdoor slamming shut, came the real opening salvo. At 3:02 p.m., the company's general counsel received a letter from the SEC requesting documentation, beginning with Greg's expense reports for the last 7 fiscal quarters. The letter wasn't public yet, but leaks have a way of slipping through when people are looking for heroes in all the wrong places. By 3:45, the stock dropped 12%. By 4:10, someone sent me a screenshot from a group chat titled Superminority Rebellion. It was her number at the top. Message read, Clause 17.3 wasn't the bullet. It's the trigger. Wait for the blast. And that's when it hit me. Hard. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't desperation. This was strategy. Every binder, every clause, every goodbye mug left behind was a calculated move. She knew this company better than Greg ever would. She built the damn bomb. And now we were all standing on the wire, waiting for her to finish lighting the fuse. By Tuesday, the company stopped pretending it wasn't on fire. Todd, the CFO who once whispered, "You just made her the most dangerous shareholder," was the first to break. A personal leave of absence announced at 7:04 a.m., buried in a 5-line press release filled with more smoke than substance. But we knew. He didn't walk. He bailed. 2 board members followed before noon. One retired to spend time with family. The other cited new opportunities in sustainable investment. A laughable euphemism for getting the hell out before subpoenas start flying. By 1:30, word came down that our auditors, Feldon and Keene, were cutting ties. Irregularities, they said. Undisclosed conflicts. No one wanted to say it aloud. But when a Big Four affiliate ghosts you mid-merger, it's not about paperwork. It's about proximity to explosion. And explode it did. That night, the stock opened in Tokyo 19% down. Investors panicked. Phones melted. Slack channels turned into funeral homes. Greg stopped coming to the office. Rumor was he'd holed up in his Aspen house, where the air was thinner and the Wi-Fi more selective. His assistant kept sending calendar invites for meetings nobody accepted. The walls here weren't whispering anymore. They were screaming. And she hadn't posted, hadn't spoken, hadn't made a single public move. But I kept hearing her name in strange places. Not from executives, not from PR, from shareholders, Class B ones. The kind who don't show up in earnings calls or press briefings. The kind that hold just enough voting power to tilt a scale if someone cared to unify them. Someone was her. I found out through Carl Weber, an old-timer who owned 0.7% of Class B stock and ran a snowmobile dealership out of Minnesota. He called me out of the blue. "I had lunch with her," he said, 2 weeks ago. "You what?" She flew out. Quiet. No entourage. Showed up in hiking boots and a yellow legal pad. Talked me through the bylaws like I was a first grader. By the time she left, I knew exactly what Clause 18.2 could do. Clause 18.2. It hit me like ice water. That's the one that allows a superminority shareholder to invoke a procedural ethics vote to challenge executive leadership in the event of material degradation of fiduciary trust. It had never been used. It required a very specific set of triggers. Pattern of conduct. Documented breaches. A quorum of obscure shareholder types who rarely speak to each other. She found them, and now she was flipping switches. No lawsuits, no rants on Twitter. Just pressure. Quiet. Surgical. Intentional. She'd spent 2 decades being ignored in meetings where people took credit for her ideas. Now she was reshaping the company's destiny without showing her face. I opened her last message again. Clause 17.3 wasn't the bullet. It's the trigger. Wait for the blast. Clause 18.2 was the blast. She'd been playing chess while Greg was still trying to figure out how to keep the champagne cold. At 4:15 p.m., we got the internal notice. A shareholder petition had been received invoking a formal ethics vote on Greg's position as CEO. Verified. Valid. Signed by enough weight to force a response. The vote was scheduled. It would happen in 7 days. Greg had built his empire on bribes, bluffing, and branding. She was about to end it with a binder, a legal pad, and a network of snowmobile-owning shareholders he didn't even know existed. I didn't just respect her anymore. I was in awe. Wednesday started like any other corporate death spiral with a push notification. Bloomberg exclusive. Whistleblower alleges CEO engaged in systemic fraud and shareholder manipulation. Former executives' documents ignite regulatory storm. I read the headline 3 times. Then the byline. She didn't name herself in the article. She didn't have to. The documents did the talking: emails, internal memos, board summaries with redacted names that anyone with a LinkedIn account could reverse engineer in 5 minutes. My favorite line was buried halfway down the page. Anonymous whistleblower identified internally as a legacy shareholder, provided over 270 pages of material spanning 12 years, including what appears to be a contemporaneous log of C-suite decisions, expense patterns, and irregularities in vote counting procedures. A log. Of course she kept a log. Greg always mocked her for carrying around those legal pads like they were some grandma's diary. Turns out she was writing his eulogy in real time. By noon, the press release Greg's assistant tried to quietly post was already getting dunked on in real time. The kind of statement that says everything by saying nothing. The company denies all allegations and continues to operate with the highest standards of integrity. Translation: we just realized the oxygen masks aren't dropping fast enough. Then came the Zoom. An all-hands meeting, thrown together last minute. 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Mandatory attendance. Cameras optional. The company's version of a hostage video. Greg appeared 15 minutes late, tie loose, eyes bloodshot, face flushed with the kind of simmering rage that executives usually reserve for when their private jets get delayed. He started calm. He tried calm. But 5 minutes in, someone asked about the shareholder vote. Another asked about the SEC letter. A third mentioned Clause 18.2, and you could see the moment the dam cracked. Greg slammed his hand on the table and shouted into the camera. She was nothing without me. She was a glorified office manager with a good memory and a bad wardrobe. I built this. Then silence. 47 employees still on mute. One poor intern forgot to turn his mic off and whispered, "Jesus Christ." The clip hit Twitter within an hour. The shareholder revolt went nuclear. People weren't just whispering in chat rooms now, they were organizing. Someone started a petition titled, "No Confidence in Greg Harlan. Time to Clean House." Within 6 hours, it had signatures from over 80 verified Class B shareholders, former employees, disillusioned board observers, even a couple of angel investors from the original Series A round who hadn't been active in years. And then came the real kicker. She filed legal proxy paperwork. Publicly, she was now the designated voting agent for 43 small shareholders, together controlling over 9% of total Class B voting rights, just under the threshold to force a full-scale emergency review if not for one detail. She had triggered a rarely used bylaw amendment from 2011, one she wrote, that allowed consolidated proxies during corporate ethics reviews to temporarily act as a block vote. That's all it took. She didn't need the whole company, just enough weight timed perfectly, in the right place. The board couldn't ignore it. Greg couldn't bully it. And every executive who once laughed at her, who skimmed her memos or interrupted her mid-sentence, was now watching the walls close in, and realizing she'd done it without screaming, without suing, without lifting a single finger in public. I sat at my desk, reading through the documents, listening to the rising noise in the investor circles, and feeling a hollow ache in my chest. I wanted to be happy, vindicated even, and in a way I was. But the truth stung. They only cared now because she'd become dangerous. Her intelligence? Ignored. Her warnings? Dismissed. Her voice? Muted for 20 years. But give her a match and a fuse? Suddenly, everyone wanted to listen. It happened on a Friday. Not with fireworks. Not with lawsuits or riots. Just a cold, quiet morning with fog hanging low over the campus like the building itself was holding its breath. There was no calendar invite. No internal memo. No Greg's taking a step back to spend more time with family's spin job. Only whispers, parking lot conversations, nervous glances, and one unmistakable fact. Greg's car wasn't in his reserved spot. 8:30 a.m. sharp. The glass doors to the executive conference wing locked from the inside. Only board members allowed. No assistants. No PR. No Greg. But there was one familiar face we didn't expect to see again. Todd. The pale, shaken CFO who resigned, just days earlier walked back into the building in a navy suit 3 shades darker than his expression. He didn't carry a briefcase, just a manila folder tucked tight under his arm, the kind you don't hand over, you submit it like evidence. We later learned he was back under formal whistleblower protection. He testified, not to criminal intent, at least not directly, but about patterns, pressure, the manipulation of expense accounts to mask personal flights, predated equity reallocations, fabricated loss events before share buybacks, the kind of details only a CFO would know how to hide, and only a meticulous ex-colleague of his could have cataloged across 2 decades. She hadn't just taken notes. She'd left a map. Todd just followed it. The vote came down at 10:57 a.m., 7 in favor of immediate removal, 2 opposed, both of whom would retire by month's end. Greg's keycard deactivated by noon. No press release. Just a short, sterile email. Effective immediately, Greg Harlan has been removed as CEO pending further review. Interim leadership will be announced shortly. I watched from my office window as security escorted him out through the East Side employee entrance. Not the grand lobby with the media wall and the vanity awards, the side door where contractors and janitors entered. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't begging. Just stunned, glassy-eyed, walking like a man who'd misread every sign on the highway and suddenly found himself in a ditch. He clutched a black leather briefcase in one hand, phone in the other, trying to dial someone, anyone, who might still pick up. No one did. That was the emotional high point. Not because I enjoyed it. Not really. But because it finally made sense. I kept thinking she'd show. That she'd be in the parking lot, arms crossed, watching him with that silent, knowing look of hers. But she never came. She didn't need to. She'd already won. She was never fighting for attention. She didn't want credit. She wanted consequence. And now he was living in it. The final twist came in the form of a footnote buried in the HR logs. Someone leaked it to me. Greg's NDA-stuffed severance contract. The one that would have bound her to silence with legal superglue? He never got it signed. He'd shoved it across the desk, smirking, assuming she'd fold like everyone else. She didn't fold. She walked. And because of that, everything she knew, every note, every clause, every buried inconsistency, remained hers to wield. Greg didn't lose his job because of a scandal. He lost it because he mistook silence for surrender. He never realized that quiet doesn't mean weak. Sometimes, it means precision. And in that moment, as he stepped out into the cold light of his own downfall, I realized she hadn't just burned his empire. She rewired the fuse box first. 2 weeks. That's how long the board stayed quiet. No emails, no updates, no public statements beyond the limp confirmation that Greg had been transitioned out, and an acting COO would be evaluating continuity structures. Translation: they were stalling, buying time, praying the stock would stop bleeding long enough to throw a clean suit over the crime scene. But it didn't. The street didn't care about their damage control. The markets weren't fooled by placeholder titles. And the shareholders, especially the smaller ones who'd been shut out of power for years, weren't just watching anymore. They were organizing, clicking, voting. And then, on a quiet Wednesday morning, the press release dropped. Interim chair appointed by shareholder supermajority. 1 sentence. No fluff. No image. Just a name. Margaret Lane. I dropped my coffee. Not because I didn't believe it. Because I did. She never asked for the throne. She didn't campaign. She didn't do interviews or strategy calls. She just positioned herself. Precisely. Invisibly. So when the system collapsed under the weight of its own corruption, she was the only person still standing on solid ground. I stared at her name on the release and thought about the last 20 years. Every time she was talked over in a meeting, every "we'll circle back" when she raised a concern, every lunch she spent alone with a binder instead of schmoozing with VC sharks. They used to call her the office historian. Said it like an insult, like taking notes and remembering context was some kind of weakness. But history has a long memory, and she weaponized every second of it. The irony was cruel and perfect. The 50,000 shares Greg mocked as toilet paper were still technically diluted, yes. On paper, they were worth a fraction of their peak value. But leverage isn't always financial. Sometimes leverage is knowing. Knowing the clauses, the laws, the angles. Knowing where the rot begins and where to press when it's time for the fall. That knowledge, that precision, it was worth more than any golden parachute. I heard a few of the remaining board members resisted her appointment. Not because she wasn't qualified, hell, she'd ghostwritten half the corporate playbook. But because they were scared. Scared of what else she knew, what else she had saved, what else she might say. She didn't respond to the rumors, or the press inquiries, or the congratulatory LinkedIn posts from people who hadn't spoken to her since 2014. She just got to work, quietly, decisively, and with the same orthopedic shoes and navy cardigan they once laughed at behind closed doors. I never spoke to her after it all came down. Not directly. I think she knew I'd stayed silent longer than I should have, that I didn't speak up when I should have stood beside her. I don't blame her for that, but I still keep the last message she ever sent me. Don't sign anything. I didn't, and because of that I still have my job. My conscience, that's another story. But this I know, she didn't just outplay Greg. She outlived the entire damn empire he built on arrogance and amnesia. She never raised her voice. She just let gravity do the talking.